This episode is brought to you by Self-Care for Diabetes, a virtual online program that's doing diabetes care differently.
We don't tell you to lose weight. Instead, we help you create positive and meaningful changes that make your life with diabetes better than before. Visit selfcarefordiabetes.com to learn more.
Hey, Glenys, how are you doing?
Hey, Rebecca. I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I am just excited to once again talk to you about all of our awesome work with our clients in our group with Self-Care for Diabetes, but a theme that just is all encompassing because it has to do with, mindfulness and mindful eating and intuitive eating, which, we've known about for years and just in the last couple of years has exploded in popularity. And people can, if they know about these concepts or they're working with these concepts, it's like the second that concern for diabetes shows up, whether it's a high A1C or something like that, it's like the brakes, the car, and suddenly it's like, well, I can't keep doing this with
it's
diabetes.
not for me.
Right.
Yeah.
Or it's a fear, like I want to keep doing this. What do I do? And it's a scary kind of stuck, frozen feeling. So today is all about kind of myths and facts around that and just really the pros, right? Like we want to focus on all the positives for why actually, whether you're just starting intuitive eating or the concept of mindfulness and mindful eating is new to you, or you've been practicing it and you're worried that you need to give all that up. We want to talk all about the pros and the reasons why they really go hand in hand, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been coming up in our groups a lot too. I think that, people who are managing to sort of eat more intuitively rather than go back to the diet. And then for the people who are newer to their diagnosis, they are kind of like, I swore I would never diet again, but then I got my diagnosis and now I feel like I have to diet again. I don't know how to do this eating thing without being restrictive. And, I feel like everything I eat is bad for me and wrong for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting because food can be just like a hot potato, and when potatoes are bad because they're the carbs, right? I know I'm laughing at my own little jokes.
Yeah.
I had a listener email that said she just chuckled when I was like, I'm peachy. We're going to talk about sugar. So there we go. Seriously. It can be a hot potato just because of all the history around good and bad food and good and bad bodies and dieting and all this stuff. And so it's like, it is, I know even when we were talking about how we know we need to talk about food, but how we're going to talk about food in our groups and hold space, especially because when we're writing these modules and having conversations around education, we don't get the benefit of hearing an individual story or the benefit of getting feedback to tailor and customize. And so I think the point of it is that when we want to be the most helpful, when it comes to having a diabetes diagnosis or, like I said, a pre-diabetes mention or high A1C lab that is bringing this interest into self-care for diabetes, it's like everything matters. It's like you don't want to remind people of good or bad food, but at some point, knowledge about food and, meal mix and energy balance and stuff in ways that could be helpful, it is important to know about, right? But when we think about an individual's experience, it's all the diet culture stuff and all the good, bad stuff. And an essential core part of intuitive eating and healing a relationship with food is to fire the food police and all foods fit. And so you might, be, having full permission to eat and being super flexible and loving it, and then suddenly feel like, oh, well, I did something wrong with that because now I have this diagnosis. And that's also not necessarily true, that there is something that you did that caused the diabetes, and or that you can't blend intuitive eating and this awareness of how your body handles, food and regulating blood sugar with, eating toward your preferences.
Right. And I think that, people forget that there can be other body cues that you can start listening to other than just hunger and fullness with diabetes. So it's sort of relearning or learning what your body, it's still very intuitive, but you're sort of learning what's going to work well for your body, and that's just a process. And I think it's sort of like when you get that diagnosis of diabetes, you need to fix it now. And instead, learning what works for you does take time and requires some patience and experimenting. And I think people sometimes feel like they don't have the time when they get that diagnosis. Like, I've got this diagnosis and I am going to die now, is really, I think, looming in people's heads. What would you say to somebody who is sort of like, well, I just need to fix it now?
Well, every time there's something urgent, right, I tend to have lots of empathy for that urgent feeling and that urgent energy. And I usually encourage people to listen to that part of them that is expressing this urgency, and kind of ask yourself the question, like, how are you trying to help me? I want you to feel better. I want, I want you to, heal diabetes, or what, it's hard to say because that would be responsive, but just asking that urgent, I got to fix this, to try to ask yourself, well, how are you trying to help me? And there you'll get its fears and anxieties. And because sometimes it's worried a lot about what if, it's worried that you might not make any changes. It's worried that you're not going to learn. It's worried that if you do learn some things, that what if it doesn't work for me, right? So it's the beginning kind of anxiety. So if you ask that urgent self, what, how are you trying to help me? What are you afraid is going to happen if you don't get answers urgently? And I think those two questions are really important because you get some facts around your thoughts and your feelings. And facts are great because they can be guideposts to check the facts. And they could also be guideposts for what it is that you think you need right now and in this moment. So, we'll take I'm thinking of our recent group that we had, and we had someone who's new to the group, new diabetes diagnosis, and was asking, like, tell me what to eat for breakfast, right? Was asking anyone in the group. And I think the group support was great, right? Because everyone kind of stepped back a layer and really tried to help share, rather than go in and do that urgent problem solving thing, kind of step back and would share personal insight, but we're able to talk about things about, well, what's your preferences? What do you enjoy? What works for you time-wise? And then we're also able to share their own experiences about, I think even bagels came up, and we were all like, yeah, everyone likes bagels. And so that idea of saying that you like bagels, enjoying bagels, finding when it's a good time to enjoy bagels. And if it is in the morning, what are different ways of enjoying a bagel in the morning? And how do your blood sugars respond? And just that there's so much learning to that, because often they think that one choice, like, that's it, this is a mistake, it's the end. And that's actually not the case when it comes to, a positive relationship with your food preferences and, caring for your body, that these food choices are patterns. And so that fear of that urgent good and bad and right or wrong actually dissipates down. And there's so much nuance to those choices that while that you might be asking, tell me exactly what to eat, the answer is actually, much more, I find, interesting than that, because it does depend on preferences and depends on what would you like to experiment with and what's some data on how your body responds. And what you do start to see is when you can calmly experiment with things and stand in your preferences, that some of the biggest fears that you had in the beginning were not actually true or as severe as you thought. And that brings a sense of peace because now you're finding a workable way to approach your eating patterns.
Yeah. I think too, there's this misconception that intuitive eating means sort of a free for all, wild, pendulum swing to the other end, which sometimes going through that process, it does involve that. And sometimes you might go through that, but that ultimately, I think it ends up being a much more, ordered and very normal way of eating. And that the foundation of it is like what you said, enjoying your food, that you still get to pick food that you like and enjoy. And that's the most important thing. And then sort of working towards, well, what else can I add in? And what else can I do to balance this out? And I think there's also a misconception that doing that is somehow not intuitive eating or not a non-diet way of eating. And the truth is you can sort of make swaps and play with your plate and that kind of thing. And that ultimately you are still listening to, when am I hungry? When am I full? Do I like this food? How does it make me feel? And that just the experimentation might be, a little bit more with diabetes, I think. And I just think those couple of misconceptions might keep people away from the idea of eating intuitively with diabetes.
Yeah. And I know that we've, when we've worked with folks, there's kind of the stages, right? So when you first get your diagnosis and and just feeling the wave of all that, right? That there tends to be, shame and blame and this sense of overwhelm, right? And as you ride that wave, of those emotions, right? Then the door is open to this kind of calmer, practical questioning that you were asking yourself about, like, what kind of foods do I like? What am I interested in? What would I like to experiment with? Even being able to say that word experiment is pretty calming, right? It's like, it's not a rule. I start with something that I'm curious about or interested in, right? So my mind is telling me, never eat bagels again or never eat this again. And, I've said before, I'll say it again, that's a dead person's goal. Only dead people never eat that bagel again, right? But so what would I like to approach, right? And often it's like that, oh, wait a minute, I have a say, I have a preference. And so you might be at a point of intuitive eating where it's just been, well, where I'm at is that I have a bagel whenever I want. And you could still follow along those values because you think that's the best self-care choice for you. And then it's an issue of, well, what is it that you're curious about or would like to know? Like, would you like to explore different times of day and different combinations and putting together like a full plate, right? Sometimes busy people, they might be used to this quick lunch and it's literally just a cream cheese bagel. And maybe that was enough until a snack or something like that. And so the experiment could be, all right, what would that look like if it was a bagel with egg salad or something like that? And, I don't know, maybe some veggies or something on the side, right? Like that even these minor swaps that actually have something to do with time, like if what I'm learning about, meal mix and, this is a way I might be able to know about nutrition and nutrition needs and fiber and getting full, things we talk about, in our program. And that sounds like a good experiment. And, if you're checking blood sugars, you might notice that a change in your plate, boosts your energy, your enjoyment of the food, and you see how your blood sugars respond. And that one piece of data doesn't determine the next step. It's a piece of data as you're learning about how best to work on your relationship with food, embracing all the good parts that you love about intuitive eating, and trying to find this intersection that you think will work for you. And how do you know what to take what you know about nutrition for diabetes concerns and blood sugar levels and just kind of have them integrate, and it might feel like rules. We want to deal with that part that has been traumatized by the rules and gently guide yourself to more flexible experiments to get data to then make the next self-care choices.
Right. And I think I was having this discussion with somebody recently about it feels weird to have no rules in eating. And I would say, well, definitely there are no rules, but it's okay to also have guidelines for yourself. as you find out what those guidelines are for you. So for someone like me, it's like, well, I know I need to have 3 meals and probably a couple of snacks through the day, and that works best for my energy level. But that's, having the space to figure out what works for you, right? So we are not prescribing any particular pattern within our program.
Right.
We're asking people to figure out what's going to work for them. And that is hard work, I think. It's very different work from the diet culture stuff that's, everything's prescribed and it's just easy to follow rules. But this is a different kind of hard work, but I think that ultimately it's a lot more it's lasting and it's more satisfying, and you still you don't have to go hungry forever, and you get to eat food you want. So it's finding out what your guidelines are, what your patterns are, and rather than just listening to a whole bunch of set of rules that don't work for you.
Yeah. And, I would say pretty much everyone who's done our group has a strong dieting history and history of restriction. And I don't know if you had to guess just based on when people self-disclose, but maybe about half of our participants had an eating disorder as well. Right. And so if we think about that, the idea of like, oh, I don't want to hear any structure about food being scary. That part of you is trying to protect you from the trauma of dieting, from the trauma of your eating disorder. And that's part of this healing process of, well, what are my facts that I'm curious in and interested in? And only you can know. I mean, we can't even tell them, oh yeah, we can't say for sure. We can offer this guidance and these guide rails, but you are going to be your own inner caregiver here. You're going to take your wisdom and say, right now, this is what I think I want to try and experiment with around food and eating. And I have found that people can really quickly get to a point to where they can get some separation. Like, I understand that I didn't cause my diabetes, and so, that sort of culture wants to be that personal responsibility, where you get away to that point and then you decide that you want to work with your self-care patterns, right? That's part of what you're going to do for yourself. And then you have that sense of agency where you start to make your choices, and where you could start to see, okay, this is what I might be reading on the internet. And we strongly advise people in our group to come off of the internet. And that's why we have the group in the program, right? With like links that we think are helpful, et cetera, right? And so, okay, so here's my information. Now I sift through what I would like to try. And I have found that for the most part, most everyone can get to a point of separation where they can conceptualize, I'm trying to work with my body on how it handles foods and food combinations. And that idea of working with my body feels flexible, feels like the right direction. And so I can now not see these as blame and shame and rules and a diet, but more about something that I want to take an interest in. And again, that experiment word, right? And, I kind of want to drive the car here. And we have also heard people say things like, it opened the door for me to try more veggies that before I just said I wasn't into. And then lo and behold, they were really good. And so it's like there's a sense of excitement and I think it's because it was internal, right? The diagnosis might have been something that triggered okay, now I'm interested in this. But again, back to experimenting, and it's like, wow, I learned something new and this is easy and tasty. And then there's excitement because maybe there is more balanced plate type eating, or they see an improvement in their energy and their blood sugars. And that also feels good because you know what? A part of them kind of stepped up and said, I really hope we learn and try new things and find a way to have like healthy eating patterns that still feel intuitive and don't feel like a diet. And it's like, that's kind of like the bullseye that they're trying to hit anyway, right?
Right. And you hit on something good is this inclination to try new foods comes up. And what I think people don't understand, and I know this from all my clients, working with all my clients over the years, is that they think that once they start allowing themselves to make choices out of preference, that they say things like, I'm only ever going to eat pizza, or I'm only ever going to eat pancakes ever. And I said, well, let's see what happens. And what they find is, and this is all validated by the studies and the different non-diet eating models, intuitive eating and other ones, that when somebody is allowed to eat what they like and allowed to choose their preferences, that it supports the body's natural inclination to choose diversity in foods. And that's, what we'll see, right? With like, oh, all of a sudden I had this strong craving for a vegetable. And people are shocked by that because they hated vegetables, because diet culture made them eat horrible vegetables all the time that had no fat or no taste. And what I always say to that is, yes, because you can trust your body to crave diversity. You don't have to force that on yourself. And so once the body starts craving diversity in foods, that also supports something like diabetes that, benefits from having a variety of foods eaten, but that you don't need to force yourself into that working on that sense of trust with the body is really where that will stem from too. And like you said, the curiosity is allowed to come up. What would that taste like? How could I do that in a delicious way? And that, I think it's all upside for a diagnosis of diabetes, and it supports it so much more than a diet that you go on and that you can't stay on because it just robs the joy from eating.
No, I love that. It's so true and powerful. And again, it's like that idea of experiments and exploring. So you get your facts of, well, what do I think about this? And there will always be a trade-off. This takes a little more time. But once it's made, I can include it several days and it's easy, and discovering different convenience things. And, finding what fits and works for you is absolutely a big part of the self-discovery process. And, there's this phrase I have that I will often use with clients, and it's this idea of, well, what do we think of fear? There's a part of us that says, okay, fear, face everything and recover, right? So whatever the word recover means for you, because it's probably lots of different things, right? Or, right, F everything and run. And so just sit with that, right? That idea is, a part of me wants to do this, and this other part of me is like, I got to get out of here. And so the approach, the calm, compassionate approach tactic, right? That is a way that we can, feel the distress of our fears and our worries and our uncertainties, and take that deep calming breath and say, what would it look like to face everything and recover? That type of approach. And it's a great kind of way to guide through the process and through the steps, because as you discover more and learn more, you get more grounded in what you feel is going to be workable for you. And just, countless times, right, in our groups, people say, I thought one thing, tried it out, realized the opposite, or my biggest fears. Like that often is the case. And around that fear component, even if you discover something, you get some data and you realize something, and I don't know, maybe a part of you does feel a little bit sad about realizing that, you see this consistent blood sugar response in eating a certain food. That doesn't mean that you never eat again or you have to get a different blood sugar response, right? We find what's workable in there. And even if a part of you feels a little bit sad about a piece of data output, that's also kind of this is where I am right now. And whether that's, with my, emotions and how I'm guiding my food choices and my emotion regulation, or, very practically, how a meal's impact on blood sugars. I want it to be this and it was that. It's okay to feel sad about something and then get back to that calm, face everything approach. I think often the brain can flip to this mode of like, it feels like an overwhelming wave of uncertainty, and the mind's like, I can't handle this. And I think part of what we really try to help people do in our groups is like, you can handle it. It's like, we're not trying to do it for you, but we are trying to kind of hold hands virtually in the group, and the community is holding each other's hand, and we're stronger together, and we're all believing like you can handle this, right? And it's that hope and this confidence of one step at a time, one choice at a time, getting your information, riding your waves, and you will get there. You will get to a better place. And just to know that you're going to be well supported throughout the process, I think is so essential, because feeling alone and isolated, or like people don't get and understand, is like that is kind of like the worst, but feeling like you're held or you're part of, people who can understand and can offer guidance and support, or just a holding space for your pain. That is a big benefit to what we're, doing in our group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That is why we included groups with our program.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So come on and join us. Right?
What are you waiting for? Yeah.
I make jokes in the group too.
Yeah. It's like Catskills humor. It's like,
well, one last little thing that I just wanted to say as we wrap up here has to do with like where you get your information about mindfulness and intuitive eating. And the number one thing, we will include some links in the show notes, but the number one like red flag warning is there are a lot of people who will use it as do this and then lose weight. And if they're saying that and leaving this sort of either outwardly promoting it or say, ooh, people I work with usually lose weight as a result of this, they're actually not likely trained by the originators, Evelyn Tribole or Elise Resch, and they're trying to capitalize on diet culture. It's a diet in disguise, and I would run away. Yeah. What would be your like last tip or piece of advice for people who are, trying to explore mindfulness, intuitive eating, and diabetes?
Give it time, I think, is the big one for me. This is a process. It takes a lot of time. And understand that there aren't any mistakes really that you can make, and just give yourself the gift of experimentation. I think that's really hard because we talked earlier about that urgency that people experience. But if you can take a deep breath and give yourself time, I think you'll find the benefits ultimately of taking this path.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It's always so fun talking to you, Glenys. And just listeners, if you are finding some, benefit out of this, definitely check out selfcareforddiabetes.com. We've got, new groups starting up. We would love to have you with us learning and growing together. And that's our show. The podcast is made possible with support from listeners. Please donate to help offset production costs at gofundme.com/bodykindness. And please rate and review the show when you have a moment. It really matters. Let's keep the conversations going on Facebook. Search Body Kindness and request to join the group for Body Kindness readers and listeners. Have a question for us to answer on a future episode? Visit bodykindnessbook.com/question. Body Kindness books and audiobooks are available wherever books are sold. To request a signed print copy, visit bodykindnessbook.com/order. For other questions about this podcast, please email info@bodykindnessbook.com.